Alright, welcome to this episode of CosRail. And today I'm talking to BrokenNeedles. Now, I've noticed since you added me on Facebook a while back, you're quickly becoming one of the more popular cosplayers in Florida. How do you feel about that?
I am exceedingly happy about that because it's not something that I would ever have thought possible, but it's doing really well for me personally. I started cosplaying because it made me feel good about myself, and then I started sharing it with friends. And so it's built up from there, and I really haven't tried to become a popularity contest, but I enjoy having the network of friends and being able to get together with people at conventions. So that's the reason I even created a cosplay account, and I'm very happy that the popularity is sort of spread as a network of friends.
So, when you ever go to a convention nowadays, have you ever had anyone spot you that you may have never met personally before, but, maybe they saw your Facebook account that you made?
I had it a couple of times where that's happened, especially with people that I met originally on DeviantArt that I had then added onto Facebook because they created a Facebook and had let me know on DeviantArt. And then I would run into them and recognize them. I met Corin-chan that way, actually. I saw her at Shin and we kind of looked at each other and noticed each other and realized who each other was and just kind of stopped and was like, oh, I know you from the internet. And it's kind of built a couple friendships that way, where I have met people from the internet sites that I go on because they've recognized me or I've recognized them. And then we've kind of been able to get together, do cosplay groups together, and kind of shot off from there.
So, you go by BrokenNeedles. How exactly did you come up with that name?
BrokenNeedles was a name I picked out a couple of years ago because when I tend to sew, I'm very hard on my machine. I snap needles probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 times throughout a costume because a lot of the things that I use for costumes aren't necessarily the best choices, but they're the most accurate. So I've had to sew through like 8 or 10 layers of denim, and my machine is not an industrial machine. So when I work with it, a lot of times my needles snap, and it's kind of my way of saying, well, I've gone to the extreme in this costume. Ever since then, it's just kind of been the name that I've chosen to go by as far as cosplaying goes, because I think that it's something unique and interesting, and I've never heard of anything similar to it since. So it fairly well describes me.
So do you use a serger, or do you just use your typical, $100, $200 machine?
Well, I originally started sewing on my brother. I have it's a Brother Pro, I think 1001, I think is the series name.
Oh, yeah.
But I started with just my brother machine, and then a couple years ago I got a serger, a Pro Finish that they sell. It's a Singer Pro Finish they sell at Joann's. And then from there, my oldest machine broke down recently. And so my mother had given me her old machine. So now I'm working on this really, really old Kenmore, but it's all made of metal. So it's a lot easier to go through a lot of the heavier materials. But I'm looking for getting a new machine soon. But my serger is definitely my best friend.
When it comes to cosplaying, how long have you been doing that?
My first cosplay experience was in 2003. My friend Pika Belchu actually invited me to go to a Pokemon State Championships where we dressed up in character and went to go see all of these children who were playing the card game, and it was their championship card game series. It was down at the Gaylord Palms, and I dressed up as Misty, which was technically my very first cosplay. It's what really sparked the match inside of me where I was just like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what I have been made to do. I have a drama background, costuming through drama, so it's kind of an easy step in for me.
Is there any cosplayers that kind of inspire you to keep going? I know you mentioned Pikachu Bell, but is there any others that might have influenced you as far as starting out as well?
My first cosplay friends were actually the Gemini cosplay twins. They a lot of time now go around for vendors or they help with the conventions. They don't do as many cosplays just for the fun of it now. A lot of their stuff is now to be used to help with the convention building. They're one of the ones that kind of work for ShadowCon and a couple of the other conventions around the area. They were at MetroCon this past year, but they were my sister's best friends in high school, and they were the ones who asked me to be Misty back when we were doing the Pokemon thing. And so they both really inspired me because I didn't know anything about sewing back then, and so they taught me how to use a sewing machine, and they taught me how to make sure that when I was making a costume that it had to be accurate so that it looked right, so people could recognize me for the character rather than something that I could have looked like perhaps. And it's a lesson that they taught me fairly well, and I love bouncing ideas off of them and being able to show them my new costumes because it's almost like they're my cosplay mothers in a way.
always having people to support you in that direction is what I think is kind of essential, especially if you didn't have any sewing background or anything like that. I'm a guy, so you can imagine that's kind of tough for me.
I can understand it entirely. My sister's the one who taught me how to hand stitch the very first time. She's the one who helped me build one of my favorite costumes, which was Sango from Inuyasha. I made the Demon Exterminator suit, and my father helped me craft the boomerang, which was a whopping 6-foot Paris, plaster of Paris and styrofoam abomination. And then my sister and I hand built a gigantic version of Kira, the cat that Sango has. She helped me build it from scratch, and so without my sister, I'd be lost.
Oof, that sounds like a lot of work. Right now my girlfriend is in Orlando over the summer, so it's kind of hard because a lot of times when I try to do a project, because I have some experience, but I'm still not that good, so it's more like I'm always asking people online, oh, what do I do, or sending messages. Anyway, speaking of which, what are you working on right now? Is there anything?
Oh, yes. Because I just finished up my Final Fantasy X cosplays for MetroCon, I kind of had a lull of time where I was like, well, I can choose to do whatever I want from here. Next MegaCon, actually, in 2012, I plan to do a World of Warcraft group, because not only am I a cosplayer, but I'm also a video gamer, so I kind of combine both of them together. But I plan on doing a couple of the leaders of the World of Warcraft game system, namely Lady Sylvanas or Tyrant Whisperwind, which are the Night Elf and undead leaders. So they're my next in line of costumes to start.
And do you have anything else planned down the road, or maybe any kind of dream cosplays in the works?
Well, one of my dream costumes I've already completed once, but I plan on remaking her, because at the time I made it, I knew I wasn't ready to. I didn't have the skill set to make her, and that is Cosmos from Xenosaga. Yes, I made her once, and I wore her to AFO a couple years ago. And at the time, Xenosaga wasn't very popular, so not a lot of people knew who I was, and at the same time, it was a costume that required a heavier skill set than I had acquired at the time. So I feel like I need to go back and revisit that costume and create it anew, because though it had like LCD lighting so that she would actually glow because she is a cyborg, it wasn't to the best of my ability, and I have a hard time doing worse than what I think I am capable of. So I feel like I need to go back and revisit that costume so that I can be happy with it. Because I almost feel like I almost failed the character in a way, because I didn't make it as well as I had planned to do so, and so I feel like I need to go back and work on it, because every single costume I do, I slowly improve my craft. Each costume I work on, I learn a different technique, and each technique I learn helps me with my next costume. So it's one of those things that I just hadn't learned the things yet, and I just really need to go back to it. But Cosmos is definitely a dream costume of mine.
So speaking of that, have you ever made like a lot of mistakes when it comes to making costumes?
My biggest costume that I made the most mistakes on was Sango from Inuyasha. I know it was my first costume, but at the same time, I made a lot of dumb errors. Things that I knew I was doing wrong when I started them, and I kept going at it, and I messed it up in a way. I've remade her bodysuit and her armor probably 6 times, because the first time I made it out of poster board, which is awful for armor because you bend your stomach and the piece snaps and then it stays folded down. Or you kneel down on something wrong and it crinkles and then it looks awful. So I have made tons of errors in that costume, but every time I've fixed it, I've kind of learned new things about the materials that I'm working with, and it gets a little bit better. Most of the time, my costumes don't make it to completion until I have fixed all of the silly errors that I've done. I think the worst thing I've ever done is I made Cece from Kojias, and I made it out of flannel instead of any sort of stretch material, and I had to wear it in like May. Mm-hmm. So it was hot and it was sticky, and it was a disaster.
Ooh.